Welcome everyone to This Week in Svelte. This is spooky season because it's Friday 13 October. So, spooky. And
Yeah, I didn't even notice that.
I am Paolo. I will be your host for today. And joining me today, there's not Enrico because Enrico will join us from next week. But we have a special guest and co-host, which is Thomas.
Hello.
And Thomas is a very proficient developer, very active in the Svelte community, and like it's the main maintainer of MeltUI, which you might have not have heard about, but you will for sure heard about it after today. This is our usual agenda. We will have a changelog. So we actually have a small changelog. We will have some quick fact and announcement. We will have no community showcase today, but we will have a small discussion and a small Q&A. Actually, a big discussion, probably. But let's go ahead and start with the changelog. And I will actually check the changelog for SvelteKit. So we have a changelog just for SvelteKit. There are some fixes. Mainly this is a patch change. So fix correctly update $page URL.hash when navigating history. So this is a bug fix about, like, if you know there's this page store that SvelteKit provides you, and before, like, the hash part of that was not updating when navigating history, and now it's fixed. It's a fix to strip the virtual module prefix from error messages. So if you are not aware, basically the virtual module is a way that Vite plugins, which is what SvelteKit is, can pass information to the actual code. And Svelte is actually using some of them. And basically it's, well, like in the error messages, there was this virtual module. There is the convention of using virtual colon to get the prefix as a prefix for virtual modules, and this was showing up in the error messages, and now it's not. There's also cancel ongoing navigation when the browser back button is hit to prevent an incorrect page from being rendered. This is another super weird edge case, because basically if you are very fast in clicking back and forth between navigation, Svelte was basically lagging behind, and so now it's not. Only remove Vite manifest when copying file. This is it's a small fix about the Vite plugin. So this is the changelog. We don't have a changelog for Svelte because, again, not because the maintainers are not active, but because they're actively working on Svelte 5, which is very, very juicy. So let's move on to quick fact and announcement. And we have a single quick fact that's also like, it's also a quick fact from the old days, like from the last time, which is that, like, the call for proposals of Svelte Summit is closing in a couple of days. So please rush to propose your conferences, your talks, because we want to hear you talk. Let's go ahead. As I've said, we don't have a community showcase, but we kind of have, because we have a This Week in Discussion, and we kind of have also a community showcase, because as I've said, my co-host here, like our proud Thomas, let's go back to here. It's the maintainer of a very popular library. It's actually the maintainer of a lot of library, probably. It's one of the maintainer of Radix Svelte, but he also, like, created this Melt UI. I just noticed that, like, this is a brand new change on the documentation website.
Yeah, what happened there too? Yours is like dark. The components are dark where normally they're white. I think you're using some extension that
it
makes the page dark.
it might be. It's actually like I'm using Arc browsers, so I don't know if maybe.
Oh, you're using the theme maybe.
Yeah, it's
So what's it called?
Arc browsers.
Yeah, but I think you're using like does Arc
Uh,
call it when you have
I,
custom themes, Arc brushes or something like that?
yeah, no, actually, I don't have one, so I don't know. Maybe it's by default, but like Arc, it's using this by default. But I mean, this is actually pretty nice. So
I actually like it.
yeah, I mean, and this shows one of the strengths of MeltUI, which is very, very composable, very, very adaptable, very easy about adaptable. Like you will get dark mode for free.
That's true.
It's also probably like because I'm actually like my system is in dark mode, so maybe that's something that like this is actually something that like it's controllable with CSS. So I don't know, maybe you did not do
Maybe.
this and you are
Weird.
surprised.
I have Arc too.
Mm-hmm.
I also have dark mode. I would have to. I would need your notebook borrowed for a while so I can debug it. If please, it's an
Yeah, I mean,
order.
yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's still cool. So, I mean,
Yeah.
what I was saying is that Thomas is one of the maintainers of MeltUI, which is a very popular component library for Svelte. And the very fun thing about this is that it's actually using like a pattern, which is the builder pattern, which is a bit different from the builder pattern from from TypeScript. But basically, like you will write code like this. Maybe like the easiest component is the toggle, I guess. So you will write code like this. You will create a toggle, and basically they will provide you with all the state and behavior inside like stores and actions, so that you can basically bring your own styles. So this is pretty cool because Svelte needed libraries with unstyled libraries, and this is actually a solution for that. You can also use like the preprocessor. They actually have a custom preprocessor that allows you to write slightly less verbose syntax. But I mean, this might seem confusing, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Like these are all Tailwind classes, and if you remove these and just style your button, I guess you can actually, no, not for this one.
I think Accordion has an example of CSS that you can show.
Yes. So for example, if we go to the accordion and we view the code, we can actually see the CSS. Like this is actually like you can actually just use normal divs, h2, and then style everything inside your normal style. So this is a pretty cool library. But like we are using this at work. And one of the pitfalls probably that we have is that obviously like you have to kinda understand how this library works under the hood to properly like to use it very, very effectively. Like you can use it very easily by copying the code that they provide and just style it how you want. But it's very helpful to actually know the insides of MeltUI. So what I did is I prepared for all of you as a mini MeltUI mini workshop. So I'm actually using your modified REPL, Thomas. So
Nice.
we will go through all the things that you need to know to understand how MeltUI works. So let's jump into these. Let's jump into this travel together. And if everyone wants to, like, if everyone, I hope everyone, like, I'm zooming in enough. If you can't see the code, feel free to tell me, and I will zoom in. So this is basically all the steps that we are gonna travel through. So the first step is to understand how MeltUI works, is understand how action works in Svelte. We already talked about this the last episode, but it's a good refresh. Basically, an action in Svelte is just a function that takes in a node and eventually, like optionally, a props. In this case, we are just passing the text as a prop. And usually what you do inside actions is vanilla JavaScript. So you can actually access the node and you can register listener on it, and you can like remove listener from them. You can dispatch custom event, and you can do things basically. So in this case, this very function is abstracting away a very simple, behavior, which is whenever you click on the node that you register this action to, you actually get, like, you log a value, which is the value that you are passing in to the action, and then you dispatch a new event. So very, very simple listener. From this function, you can also return an update function and a destroy function. The update function will be called by Svelte whenever the props changes, so with the new text in this case. And the destroy function will be called, like, it's a cleanup basically. So how are we using this? Like, very, very simple. We are using on this button, and we are registering the event on my event to catch the detail basically. And so what will happen is that when we click on the button, we get the value of log, which is an empty string, and the detail is this number, this random number. And if we change something here and we click again, we get the value of log, which is the same gibberish that I wrote here, and the new details. So this is the gist of how action work in Svelte. I don't know, Thomas, if you want to say something about it. I mean, this is a pretty basic thing. So
yeah, one thing I'd like to say about actions, I feel like they're pretty underrated. One thing I love about them is that you could actually use it in vanilla JavaScript if you want. As Paolo said, it's just a function. We're not importing anything from Svelte or anything like that. The only thing Svelte specific is the syntax, how we put it into an element with the use directive there. But in theory, you could use it with vanilla JavaScript. Let's say you had like an HTML reference into a variable or something like that. You could call the action with the node. You would just have to deal with the update and the destroy too, but it would 100% be possible to use it in vanilla JavaScript. I love how Svelte stays true to a lot of JavaScript fundamentals. It doesn't stray too far.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we can literally import on mount, for example, and inside on mount, just like call. We could literally do document.querySelector and select the button, and for example pass these, like call these to my action and pass in this thing, and this will absolutely work. Just like, after all, it's basically what Svelte is doing under the hood, or something very, very similar to this. So yeah, this is absolutely something very true about Svelte and very wonderful about actions. And I agree that they are underrated, because like I use them all the times. So
yeah, one thing I'd say that this is pretty unique in Svelte is because normally to do this in vanilla JavaScript or other frameworks, you would have to, let's say if you were using Vue or React, you would have to first create a reference, call it in the script tag, pass the reference down, and only then would it work. With Svelte, you just have the action, you just use it directly on the element. You don't need to do anything else.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
most action.
Absolutely. And also, like, Taimur Shan is asking to speak, so please.
Yes, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I don't know my question is relevant or not, but I'm having problem in managing server-side state. I have a plus page where I am using my login component, and at the server side, I'm authenticating user and logging it in. The problem is the duration while user clicks on the button, it takes few moments to log him in. I want to show some kind of state on the button navigation, and I want to catch that time period. Can I do it using actions or anything stores?
Yeah, I mean, actually, like this is a bit more complex because actions can definitely help you with catching something. Like again, you can define custom events, etc.
They have in Next.js,
Mhm.
they have the what they call skeleton UI. They render it. We look at everywhere where something is loading on the page. They show the skeleton animation. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, you can actually
Loading
like
UI, loading UI, they call it.
yes, I mean, you have a way of knowing if you are navigating away from Svelte, and it's a custom store from SvelteKit, which is called
Yes.
navigating, and you can get that from $up/navigating slash
But I,
navigation. So you
but
could
I think I need to use that within on mount, because whenever I refresh the page, it just blinks, just shows and goes away whenever the page loads.
I mean, I would love to help you, but obviously I cannot see your code. So, but feel
Okay.
free to like either you can open a question. We have a lot of channels here in the Svelte Discord, so you can definitely post a question here. Both me or like any other ambassador or even just some other user will try to read through your question and will definitely help you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you too. Okay, so back to what we were saying. So this is actions. Let's see now how a store works. A store in Svelte, it's something that it's used to, it's actually like what allows Svelte to have reactivity inside, outside of Svelte component. And why is that? Because the store, it's actually like a very simple implementation of the observable pattern. So Svelte provides you with this writable, which is a way to create a store, and also provide you with a very nice syntax inside Svelte component, because if there is like if you have a store and you prefix it with $sign, you can access the type of the like the value of that store inside Svelte component. So as you can see, normally, like I will do a change to retrigger this console log. Normally, like this Svelte store is of type object, but the value of this Svelte store is of type string, and the value at the actual value inside is Svelte store. But you can also like create a custom store very easily with initial, like you get a function that create the initial value, like you get the initial value. Then you basically have a set of all the runners. What are the runners? Because basically in Svelte, a store is just an object that contains a subscribe function that return an unsubscribe function. And optionally, it can take a set value and an update value. So this is basically a writable store in Svelte. If you remove the set and update, it will be a readable store. But like subscribe, a field with subscribe is literally the only thing that Svelte needs for treat these as a store. So with this function, create custom store, we are getting a value in, and we are storing these inside this value. Then we are getting, like we are creating a set. And what we will do is that we will store inside this set all the functions passed in to the subscribe method. So basically, whenever you want to subscribe to a store, you will need to pass a function that will be called whenever the value of that store changes. And this is what basically Svelte is doing automatically when you do $Svelte store. It's calling this subscribe function and storing the unsubscribe function to then call that function when the component is destroyed. And so, as we can see, like when we are logging subscribing here, so here's the subscribing, and we are logging unsubscribing when we are unsubscribing from this store. We create this custom store with a value of 10, and despite like this being an object with a custom function named subscribe, Svelte is able to actually handle these very easily. Now, how can we update this? With the set function. So the set function takes in the new value and then just basically call every subscriber, so every runner, with the new value. And so this very easily we built the writable store from scratch very easily. And again, the things that I want to emphasize is the fact that Svelte is able to handle this syntax despite this being something that we actually made up. So this is very important. I also want to introduce you with the concept of derived store, which is a store from Svelte that allows you to pass a store and a function that will be called whenever this store is updated, and the value that you return from this function is actually the value of this store. So this uppercase is actually a store. So let's see how everything works. So this is the Svelte store, and we are getting Svelte store. This is our custom store, and we are getting our 10. And this is the uppercase. So as you can see, this is always in sync. Like this uppercase is always in sync with this Svelte store, and I can tap into this and getting the custom store that again we made, updating the UI just by using $custom store. So this is another really important part of Melt UI. Again, Thomas, I don't know if you have comments about this.
Not too much here, I would say. I would say that one thing to notice also is the difference between using the $sign and using something like get. Svelte store does export a get function that you can call, but it's not reactive. Get only does it one time. What the $sign is doing, as we're saying here, is it's automatically subscribing to the store. And whenever the component gets destroyed and stuff like that, it unsubscribes automatically. The get function, however, it immediately subscribes, gets the value from the subscription return, and immediately unsubscribes. That is a little bit not performance affected because of the subscription and unsubscription that's going on, adding a new subscriber to the set and stuff like that. But yeah, it works, but it's not something you want to abuse, and normally you wouldn't use it. It's a very specific thing, but it's something cool to know the difference about.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what Svelte is doing on the dude is that I get a variable, for example, count, and I can say custom store dot subscribe, and what it's doing is that is getting the value every time and assign it to count. So I can do count equal value, and basically this is what Svelte is desugaring your $sign store to. So this count will always be in sync with the store. And this function will be called every time the store changes, basically. So for example, if we go on and actually print the count, we can see that like count is 10. Let me do a better job at showing you this. Okay, so count is 10. And when I update count, like my store, it will also update count, because again, this function will run every time custom store update. So this is another important thing to know about Svelte to understand Melt UI. Let's go on and see actions as store, which is another very important part of Melt UI, because they strive to make you write less code possible. And so instead of making you extracting the action for the behavior and the store for the attributes and etc., they actually do something very clever.
Yeah, I'm going to write in the chat how it would look if we didn't do it while Paolo explains this.
Yeah, exactly. So what we are doing here is kind of abusing the fact that in JavaScript, everything is an object, even functions. And given that in JavaScript, everything is an object, even functions, and that everything with a subscribe is actually a store for Svelte, what we can do is we can create an action, which again, add a listener on the click, for example, but we can also assign subscribe and set to an action. So if we do this, basically this function will have subscribe and set as properties. And so this function can be treated as a store by Svelte. And so when we create action and store an action, this action can be a store. So we can see that this is a store, and we can actually update this store very easily. And this reflects here, but we can also use it as an action on the button. So whenever I click on the action listener, it will log this was added via an action. And the very interesting thing is that once we have the set function, we can actually use the set function inside the action. So this action is registering a listener to set a value on the store, which is the action itself. So this is pretty complex, but it's a wonderful thing that Thomas has come up with to allow us to actually just use an action and actually have some values associated with that function. So this is very, very cool. And
Thank you. I've just shared an example of what it would look like if we didn't do that. Of course, we could change the name a little bit so it wasn't that big, but still in the script you would have to use two different variables. One thing that you could also do is have trigger be a store, but also add a action key to it. So then it would look like use trigger.action, but
yes.
Still it's more verbose. Why not just do it like we're doing it here?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So this is how you could use, for example, the tab from Melt UI. So this is how you use them today. So you just retrieve the trigger, for example, from create tabs, and then you can use this trigger as an action and also spread this trigger as a store. So it's much less verbose than these. And also, like, another interesting thing is that is also like avoiding cluttering your component, because then you have to remember trigger action, trigger attributes, then maybe you have another create tabs and you have to create another trigger two attributes, trigger two actions. So it's very, very interesting. And again, thanks Thomas to find this out, because it's very cool. I cannot close these for the love of me. Let me see. Okay, we will keep there. Okay. So what we were saying, spread stores into element. So this is also something very important, because like we've seen that we have to spread this store into this element. So what does this does? So let's see how these work basically. So we have this writable, which is basically an object that has a style property and background color red. And we also have this other writable, which is actually a function that returns style with background color BG, which it's the one of the parameters that we are passing into the function. So how do we use it? We can just spread these into an element, and by spreading these, as you may be aware, basically what we are doing is that we are assigning this style attribute to this div. And when we are doing these, what we are saying is that we are accessing the function that is inside this store, getAttributes, passing the green color, and we are spreading these inside the div. So this is, again, very, very important. And the reason because it's very, very important is because now I can basically like MeltUI, which is our library, can pass back some attributes that we can use on our divs from their library. So this is very important also because another very big benefit of MeltUI is that it's fully accessible. So they want to have a way to control the accessibility of your components. And this is a pretty clever way to do it. Another thing that Thomas added to this demo is this derived, because obviously, like, you can also use this with derived store. So for example, if you have this input value, which is a writable with a string, you can have a derived based on this input value, and the derived actually just return an object with the input value. And what this allows you to do is that when you change something here, for example, green, the derived will change accordingly. So if you spread these, exactly, like you are actually changing the background of this very input. So if I do tomato, if I can spell tomato, I will get tomato. If I do Rebecca purple, which is my favorite HTML name.
Damn, you know your default colors.
Sorry?
You know your default HTML colors.
Yes. Okay.
And one thing that's cool about this too is that this is basically how we do it now. We're going to show a more advanced example, but this is kind of a builder if you think about it.
Yes, absolutely.
It's yeah.
And the reason because it's kind of a builder is because one thing that we are gonna do now is actually build a builder. So to really understand what how MeltUI works, the best way to do is actually creating a builder. So this is the end result. Okay, so we want to create this builder. I will open it in split view, which is the tabs. And basically, like, this is a basic tab. And obviously, like, we want something much, much simpler and much, much uglier, as you can see here. But like, the important fact is that you can tab, like you can have these different tabs, and you can have the result showing here. And like when I click on tab 1, it's all just tab 1 is shown. When I click on tab 2, just tab 2 is shown. So we want some code that kind of resemble these, and we have a list of trigger. And then, I mean, let's not look at the HTML because this is pretty. This is actually pretty. This is for this, and we want just ugly HTML. So let's go ahead and try to create a builder. So I just brought these just to make this work. So we are actually in this part of the document. And here, as you can see, it doesn't work. Like, we don't have the tab here. We don't have the, like, all the three content are shown. So this is the basic HTML. And actually, a thing that I would like to do is remove these. I forgot to do this, because what we want is, instead of having a selected class, we want data selected here to make the background red. So what I want basically is that I have this list of buttons, and I want the functionality that when I click on a button, I will actually get only these. Like, for example, this is the trigger for the tab 1. I want just this content be shown. this is the trigger for the tab 2. I want just this content to be shown. So we have our list of triggers. Actually, this is another typo that I always forget. So I've created this basic create tabs function. And what we have is the exact same thing that the create tabs builder from MeltUI built. And it's an object with a state and a value. And this value, it's a writable store. And the elements, and this is like the trigger to spread and use inside the button, and the content to spread and use inside the content. So let's make this work. I've created this function that basically just create the value, and we can actually, let's do this, we can actually take the first tab as default value, so default value, and so these can be, this can be our first value. So the values start with this default value. Then we have to create the trigger action. So the trigger action will take a node as input, and this node will actually be like one of those buttons. And so what you will do is we can create a listener. So function listener. And what do we want to do? Okay, this will be the click listener. So what we want to do is whenever I click here, I want to change this value. So let's say for a moment that I will just do, this is a writable, so I can do value.set. Let's say that I will change this to a value of tab 2, always. I can register these node.add event listener, click, and I will register this listener. And obviously I want to clean up things. So return, destroy, and whenever these get destroyed, I want to node.remove event listener, click for listener. So now whenever I click here, like if I try to show the value, so if I do $value, I will get a value. And the value that I get is tab 1. Okay, perfect. Let's wrap it into a div so that we can go on the next line. So the value is tab 1. Now, since we are spreading, like we are using this trigger function on every button, we are actually registering this event. So whenever I click on tab 2, I get the new updated value. Okay, this is fine. Now, how do we get to actually get the value, the correct value for like what I can change this to? I could do it in two ways. I could pass a parameter saying that I want this button to trigger tab 1 or tab 2, but this is a bit more verbose and there is another way to do it. So this trigger store, as we can see, it's actually a function that takes the trigger item.id. So instead of having it to be a writable, I want it to be a derived. And the reason because I want it to be a derived is because I want these to be derived from the actual value. So then I get this function, which is like we take the value of value, and from here I can return a function, and this is the function that will be called here when we trigger, like when we spread this trigger. So this will take the ID as input, and what we need to return is the list of attributes that we want to spread into this object, into this element. So what kind of values we want to spread into this button? One thing that we want for sure, because then we can use it, is the data.id. and the data.id will be ID. Now what this does is that basically if we go and inspect the element here, this will actually add a data-id tab 1, data-id tab 2, and data-id tab 3 to the buttons. So now we can use these to actually set the value here. Instead of defaulting to tab 2, we can do node, which is the button, dataset, and inside this node.dataset will be every element. Like when you do data-something on an HTML element, that something is inside this node.dataset. So we can actually add .dataset.id. And so just by doing this, we can see that when we click on a tab, we actually get the correct value inside the store. And so this is something, but we also want this, like we want to see the tab being highlighted. And we said that to have these, we want data selected to be present on this button. And how can we do it? Well, with our derived store. So instead of just returning the data ID, we can return data selected, and we need to return these only when the value, so the current value, is equal to the ID. And we can't just do these because if you say true or false, data selected is still there. So we need to check if value is equal to ID, and if it is, we can even just use an empty string. Otherwise, we need to return explicitly undefined. So by doing this, what is happening is that whenever we change value, this derived function will rerun. So this will be a new function, and this new function will be called again by Svelte, and this new set of property will be updated on this button. So if we go there, we can see that tab 1 is already selected. And if we move to tab 2 is selected, and to tab 3 is selected. So now this is working. Now let's make this part work too. So we get this function content, which is the action that we are calling on this div. But spoiler alert, this actually does nothing, because this div does not want a behavior. Like, it does not need a behavior. So this is just here, like they added these to make the preprocessor work better, but also for consistency. And likely Thomas will enlighten us after. But the important part here is this one. So we want a function that takes the tab, which is currently like this is the content for the tab 1, and so we want another derived here. So we want the derived to be dependent on value, so we can get the value, and then we can return again a function to be called that will take the ID as input and will return an object to spread into these. And what can we do to actually hide the parts that are not visible? Well, there is actually a super useful HTML attribute, which is hidden. And we want these to be present when value it's equal. It's different from ID. And in this case, it's the same thing. Like, we want these present only if it's different from ID. Otherwise, we need to specify undefined. Otherwise, HTML will still see the hidden value and will hide everything, basically. So now we should have everything. And if we go here, we can see that we don't see the other tabs. So it's probably working. And we have everything. And the very nice part is that given that those are derived from value, I can also, and this is also a behavior that MultiUI provides you, we can also do this. Like, if we create a button and we say, change your value to tab 2, we can literally do on click and we can just update the store. So I can do $value equal to tab 2. And now if I go here, change the value to tab 2, and it actually works. And everything works because like these properties are derived from the value. So this is how you can build a builder. And I mean, there is Thomas, which actually has built a lot of builders. So I want to hear your opinion on this.
On what specifically?
In general, like, do you think I did a good job?
Yeah, of course, you did explain it pretty well. One thing I'd say that's cool too, not only as you said that you can do like override the state directly in value there, in Melt, do you have some more advanced stuff like you can bring in your own store, for example? Meaning that let's say you define your store elsewhere and you want it to pass in that to the builder, you can, meaning that the builder, whenever you, let's say you have a value store defined in a JavaScript file or something like that, you can import it, you pass it down to the builder, and it will be modified whenever you click the tab triggers. That's cool.
Yes.
The reason why we have that, now just changing subjects a little bit, the reason why we have that content thing over there, that use content, even though content doesn't have any behavior at all,
Yes.
is actually just because of Melt's preprocessor. We can talk briefly about it later on, but basically the preprocessor is just something that transforms syntax into another syntax. So yeah, if you look at the screen and turn on the preprocessor, we can see that use melt equals root. Use melt equals item, use melt equals trigger, all that thing. That gets converted to, can you show how it looks without the preprocessor?
I mean, I think like we can use the toggle as an example so that all the code is inside the page.
Yeah.
So this is without the preprocessor. So you have to spread root and use root, or with the preprocessor on, you can use melt and just pass $root. And this will be the sugar to this.
Exactly. But since we don't want the preprocessor to have to actually delve inside the code and check if something has an action or not. So we kind of have a builder method inside Melt, which is an easy way to create these actions as stores and builders and stuff like that. And even if you don't pass in an action, it creates an empty action, just so it's easier for the preprocessor to destructure. But in the case, you wouldn't require to pass and use content. But at the same time, it's valid. What if Melt later on adds an action had some functionality? So
yeah, exactly. This is also something that I was thinking of. Like, it's always better to instruct your users to still use an action, because if in the future you want to add behavior, you realize that you need to add behavior of something, you don't need to then instruct them, oh, go and change your component. You can just say, okay, update melt.
Exactly. So that's pretty cool.
This is pretty cool. Also, like...
and sorry. Just one thing I wanted to say is that a lot of people, I think, at the beginning questioned, like, why would I use builders instead of a library that just ships components for me? And initially, before MeltUI, there was Radix Svelte. Some of you may have heard about it, and it was using components. But there are some benefits. For example, you can see in the REPL over there that we're using scoped styles with our elements. If we were using Radix Svelte, since it's actually a Svelte component, like if we would go to tabs in Radix Svelte.
Here we go.
Yep, exactly. And go to the code if that's visible. That doesn't seem visible. Oh, okay. I got scared. You can see that they do have a class that's being passed, but I think I use global on the scoped styles below. Yeah, yes. I use global. I would require to do that. That's just how Svelte works, meaning it's a bit harder to style, right?
Yes.
Meaning it would be easy if I just use Tailwind, but some people don't use Tailwind. Some people don't like it. Or sometimes, even when I use Tailwind, I do like using classes here and that. So this is a benefit of Melt. It's easier to just do whatever you want with it, to add also transition directives, animation directives, other actions,
Yeah,
event
absolutely.
listeners,
Like
style, anything like that.
like you said it sometimes, but I think it's completely true. Like Melt UI is more to build component libraries than to build components. Like you can build component, but you can actually like it's mostly useful if you want to build your own component library, even just internal component library. So like if
Exactly.
you want to have the flexibility of building your component and style your component however you like it, because after
Exactly.
all, like for most jobs you will probably need to build your component library. So
Yeah, and one thing about Melt, if anyone starts using Melt or is already into it but doesn't know about it, you can also completely override any behavior in Melt, like any behavior really. All events are cancelable and stuff like that, meaning that, yeah, it's really, really flexible in that sense. You can just disable things you don't like and make things work more akin to what you think should be. Of course, it's going to be more verbose if you do that, but still, it's a possibility.
And also worth saying that like this is Melt UI and you are working very close with Huntabyte, which is another Svelte ambassador, and it's another
Yeah,
content creator, and he is also working on Bits, right? Bits UI, which
exactly.
is a set of component that uses Melt UI, and it's a bit more like a component library per se, which is also under
Exactly.
construction. And the reason because it's working on Bits UI is because Bits UI is what is used in Svelte. I can never remember the name.
Shadcn.
Shadcn.
Yeah.
CDN. And this is a port of the popular Shadcn library. So if you didn't know about this, now you know it. Like so, this
Fun
is
fact, the original Shadcn UI is used over at the OpenAI dashboard, if I'm not mistaken. That's a
yeah,
fun fact.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's literally exploding in popularity, and I mean, I think it's a good idea
Yeah.
because, after all, basically what you are doing is that you are copying code over. It also has a lot of like it has a CLI. Also, like I have some slight opinion on this. Like I feel like sooner or later someone is gonna come up and say, "Oh, okay, now you can like build your Shadcn component and install it with a CLI." And actually,
I mean,
Shadcn
you can install it with the CLM.
yes, yeah, but we will define a folder when your component will leave, so that like your CI can automatically install it, and we will probably rebuild npm just by
I
doing
mean,
so.
it kind of works. Yeah, it kind of works like that, I think,
Yeah,
currently.
I mean,
It's,
like
I'm not sure too much.
the only real difference is that you are committing your node modules basically with Shadcn. So you
Yeah.
are building, like you are downloading the component with a CLI, and the component actually are committed into your code instead of living in your node folders. So
Exactly.
that's just this slight difference, but it's really subtle. So I feel like someday someone might come up with something like, "Oh, I just had an idea. What if we install every component in a folder called Shadcn modules, and so you don't have to commit it."
That'd be hilarious. One thing I'd say too is that currently in Melt we don't have too much documentation on how to componentize builders, even though they are component builders.
Yes.
That's why they are called builders. But if anyone has any doubts, a lot of times they do refer people to Bits UI source code because they use Melt's UI
Yes,
builders to create the component,
absolutely.
and pretty generic components. What I mean by generic is not as an insult. No, I mean generic is in that they can be used for a variety of use cases, which is, they're a bit more complex in that sense. Your components probably, like if you're working on a website, they don't need to be as generic. They can probably already pre-styled and stuff like that.
Yeah, also,
An example,
like we already talked about this, like me and you, and I think you are right, because obviously, like from the code that you get here, this is always a component that is scoped in itself. Like all the state, it's inside this component. So if you really want to build an accordion that is usable and reusable through your code base, obviously you will need props, and you will need a way to connect these props to the actual component created by the builder.
Exactly. One thing I want to do is recently in VidConf, Storybook shared some updates, especially some official Svelte related updates that I want to try out, so that we can have Storybook docs as well, which will serve both as a testing playground, but also as a way to show how componentization works, like with props and stuff like that, and updating melts options when props update, stuff like that. I think it'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Okay, so this was pretty long. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
But we got to the end, and so now we just need this week in Q&A that we don't have because we already we are running pretty late. So and also, like I had a small Q&A thing that I wanted to show, but it's not ready yet, so I will store this for the next week. So feel free to join. And also, like I see someone that is asking to speak, but then it kind of retract itself. So if someone wants to say something, the show is open to everyone. So if you want to talk, feel free to raise your hand, and we will invite you on stage. So in the meantime, thank you for watching. Please, I will show you so that, okay. Please leave feedback, submit topic ideas. If you have some libraries, some project that you have worked on and you want to showcase it, please feel free to reach out both to me, Enrico, Thomas, everyone. Like, write us in the Discord, we will find you and we will kill you. And we will invite you to speak here. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was great. Thank you for having me too, Paolo. Yeah. Also, people are saying in the comments about fees.